Nuoc Base, Phuoc Thi Province, South Vietnam, September 1968. Captain Thomas Bradley, U.S. Army Infantry, has been deployed in Vietnam for 7 months. He has experienced combat-led troops through firefights and earned decorations for courage under fire. He sees himself as a capable, seasoned officer who understands how infantry warfare functions today. Everything he believes about war is about to be tested in a way that will leave him angry, embarrassed, and permanently changed. Bradley is stationed at Nuoc as part of a liaison assignment, observing Australian operations and reporting on their tactics and effectiveness. Over the last week, his frustration has steadily grown. The Australians do not follow any doctrine he recognizes. They work in extremely small units, refuse to use available firepower, decline air support, and move slowly and deliberately when American doctrine emphasizes speed and aggression. Bradley has submitted multiple reports criticizing Australian tactics as overly cautious and inefficient. This morning, he has been invited to observe an Australian combat patrol directly. A joint Australian-American mission is planned into an area where a Viet Cong company has been reported. The American contingent is Bradley's own platoon of 32 well-trained, well-equipped soldiers. The Australian element consists of 4 SAS operators, 4 men. Bradley argues that this is far too small for a patrol in hostile territory. The Australian captain simply smiles and says, "Watch and learn, mate." Watch and learn. 3 hours into the patrol, Bradley watches in disbelief as the 4 Australians make his 32 men look inexperienced. They move through the jungle as if unseen. They detect enemy signs. Bradley's point man missed. They communicate using subtle hand signals Bradley can barely interpret. Most infuriating of all, they do this with relaxed confidence, as if it requires no effort. Bradley's platoon sweats, struggles, and makes noise despite trying not to. The Australians look like they are on a casual walk. When the unit halts for security, Bradley confronts the Australian patrol leader, Sergeant Danny Clark. He accuses them of deliberately making his men look bad and showing off. Clark responds, calmly telling him they are simply doing their job and that any shortcomings come from training. Bradley angrily insists his men are trained to the highest American standards. Clark agrees they are professional soldiers, then adds that SAS are not soldiers but hunters, and that Bradley may learn the difference if he keeps watching. Before Bradley can respond, Clark suddenly freezes, raising his hand. The Australians become motionless. Bradley's platoon halts as well. After a minute, Bradley hears Vietnamese voices nearby. Enemy troops are moving along a trail 30 meters away. Bradley's platoon passed them without noticing. The Australians detected them 200 meters earlier and chose not to say anything, believing mistakes teach better lessons. What follows over the next 4 hours transforms Bradley from an angry skeptic into a lifelong advocate for learning from Australian methods. This story challenges the belief that American forces were unquestionably the best trained and most effective military in Vietnam. American doctrine was believed to be the peak of modern warfare, refined through decades of experience, while Allied forces were assumed to follow America's lead. That belief shattered when Americans observed Australian SAS in action. Australian tactics did more than challenge doctrine. They exposed weaknesses in how Americans fought jungle warfare. Many American officers reacted defensively, accusing Australians of unnecessary risk-taking and showing off. Beneath the anger was an uncomfortable realization that American methods might be flawed, and that Australians with fewer resources had discovered something critical. This clash reflected 2 very different military cultures. American doctrine in the 1960s was shaped by World War II and Korea, emphasizing industrial warfare, mass forces, and overwhelming firepower. The American approach relied on bringing superior resources to bear, find the enemy, pin them down, destroy them, advance, and repeat. This approach worked against conventional armies and became institutional truth taught across the military. Australian Military culture developed under very different conditions. Australia was a smaller nation, often fighting far from home. With limited resources, usually alongside larger allies, they could not rely on overwhelming force. Instead, they relied on superior fieldcraft initiative and small unit tactics. When Australia formed its SAS in 1957, it was designed for small teams. Long-range patrols, intelligence gathering, stealth, and decisive strikes while avoiding attritional battles. By the time Australians arrived in Vietnam in 1966, their SAS had years of jungle warfare experience in Malaya and Borneo. They understood guerrilla warfare, operating deep in hostile territory with minimal support. When American and Australian forces worked near each other, the contrast was obvious. American missions often involved hundreds of troops, backed by artillery, helicopters, and airstrikes sweeping areas aggressively. Australian SAS patrols typically involved 5 or 6 men operating for weeks, gathering intelligence, conducting ambushes using stealth and precision, then extracting quietly. To Americans, this seemed reckless. How could such small teams survive or achieve meaningful results? The answer was that Australians were not pursuing the same goals. American missions focused on finding and destroying enemy forces. Australian missions focused on understanding, predicting, and striking the enemy at chosen times and locations. Australians valued intelligence over contact, patience over aggression, concealment over speed, and precision over volume of fire. In Vietnam, this often produced better outcomes with fewer casualties, which made many Americans angry. Bradley's experience was repeated throughout the war. His joint patrol was intended to showcase Australian methods. What he saw permanently altered his understanding of combat. During the patrol, Clark halted the unit after identifying a barely visible trail. Bradley's point man had crossed unknowingly. Clark set up a 4-man ambush without consulting Bradley, positioning escape routes in fields of fire with confidence or an experience. For 28 minutes, the Australians remained perfectly still. Bradley timed it. This was not forced discipline, but predatory patience. Eventually, 7 Viet Cong entered the kill zone. Clark waited until conditions were perfect. Then the engagement began. One shot dropped the first enemy. Another shot, another enemy fell. Shot by shot, 4 soldiers were killed in seconds. The remaining 3 froze briefly, then were eliminated with 3 more shots. The entire fight lasted 5 seconds. 7 enemy dead. 7 shots fired, no Australian casualties. There was no chaos, no shouting, no suppressive fire. Just calm, efficient execution. Clark cycled his rifle smoothly, engaging targets methodically. The aftermath was just as instructive. Instead of immediately moving in, the Australians stayed alert, watching for reaction forces. After 15 minutes, they searched the bodies, collected intelligence, placed ace of spades playing cards on each corpse, then withdrew along an unexpected route through extremely difficult terrain. Only after gaining distance did Clark radio a brief factual report. Bradley confronted him, asking about the cards, the delay, and the route. Clark explained the cards were psychological warfare, meant to spread fear. The delay ensured no enemy force was waiting. The difficult route avoided expected paths. Clark explained they do not follow rigid doctrine, but principles: stay hidden, gather intelligence, kill efficiently, adapt constantly. Bradley struggled to argue what he had seen exceeded anything in his experience. He could dismiss it or accept that American doctrine had limits. Honesty won. Over the next hours, the Australians repeatedly found enemy signs American soldiers missed. Bradley felt increasingly rebuked. His platoon Sergeant Mike Rodriguez told him the Australians were not trying to embarrass them. They were simply that good. Bradley had been taught American infantry tactics were the best. Now 4 Australians from a much smaller military demonstrated skills that made his training look inadequate. Worse, they did so casually, without arrogance. When Bradley submitted his report praising Australian capabilities and suggesting Americans could learn from them, He was reprimanded. His battalion commander rejected any suggestion that foreign forces had superior methods. Bradley was not alone. Similar observations were being made by American officers, intelligence analysts, and special forces. Evidence showed Australian units achieved higher kill ratios, better intelligence, and fewer casualties. But admitting this meant admitting American doctrine had flaws. Some special operations units adopted Australian techniques, but conventional infantry largely did not. Institutional pride, inertia, cultural bias, and structural differences prevented widespread change. In November 1968, during joint planning for an operation in Phuoc province, tensions boiled over Americans planned a large air assault sweep. Australians suggested reconnaissance first, followed by precision strikes. The American colonel rejected this, insisting on standard doctrine. Australian Major Peter Williams calmly warned the plan would likely fail. Williams asked Bradley to share his observations. Bradley supported the Australian proposal, saying their reconnaissance abilities exceeded American capabilities. The colonel reacted angrily, questioning Bradley's loyalty. When Sergeant Clark smiled briefly, the colonel exploded, accusing Australians of cowboy tactics, showing off and undermining American credibility. Clark responded firmly, saying they operate that way because it works. Williams intervened before the confrontation turned physical.